The afternoon light lay on New Venice like the sheen on an old bruised violet, brittle, ready to crack at a touch. Salt foam drifted down alleys that had once carried gondolas, and ash from last week's firestorms sifted across balconies, now tilted like broken jaws. From the roof of the leaning customs tower, Serafina Marcello watched the distant water lines slink inward again. She judged. By shadow, by habit, by the way gulls suddenly lifted, the city had 3 hours of exposed stones left before the next surge swallowed it. She tapped the brass cuff at her wrist, a habit left over from the days when she still expected sound to answer. Nothing did. In her silent world, only vibration, light, and the restless pulse of her own blood spoke to her. She breathed out, let the air settle, and unrolled the thing she had retrieved that morning from the mud under Rialto Arch. It looked at first like vellum, but the surface shifted when she touched it. Veins of pale green luminescence brightened in response to her body heat. Symbols, bridges intact, bridges fallen, currents mild or deadly wriggled into place. Then the whole sheet sighed, contracting minutely as though it were alive. Alive is impossible, she told herself, even as she felt the curious warmth of it through her gloves. Ink doesn't warm itself. Parchment doesn't sigh. Yet she had seen impossible things since the sea breached the ring of floodgates and the city drowned in a single arrogant tide. She had seen water catch fire and burn blue for hours. She had seen gulls that had learned to swim and fish that had learned to hop along shattered promenades in search of algae. So perhaps a living map made sense, here at the end of everything. But discovery was one thing, proof was another. She needed confirmation, measurements, and above all, she needed help. Someone who understood movement, someone who could verify the map's changes without relying on voices she could not hear. Down in the attic below the roof, she found Emilio Rivaro kneeling by a window, recalibrating a rust-clogged anemometer. He didn't see her until her shadow fell across his hands. Then his face tore into a grin, wide, hopeful, too young for the salt lines etched in it. Serafina tapped her throat sign shorthand between them. Need to speak. He set the device aside, wiped his palms on his sleeves, and turned to her fully. She signed, I found something. Might be last route inland, no, skyward. She saw the puzzlement in his eyes and clarified. Elevator rumors, the true one. The orbital spool, Emilio's brows climbed. Do you believe? He signed back. She unrolled the map between them. In the dim attic, the veins glimmered, casting emerald light across the dust. Emilio's breath caught. She saw it in the hitch of his shoulders. He reached out but stopped short of touching. Is it safe? She shrugged. The map's surface rippled again, and one segment, an entire quarter of New Venice, faded to gray. A new line unfurled from their current position to a cluster of warehouses near the old hydrogen plant. There, a symbol like an arrow pointed straight upward, ending in a stylized circle, the rumored sky elevator dock. Emilio inhaled sharply. Tonight's tide will cross this new line by dawn. If elevator exists, we leave city forever. If not, we drown. Serafina smiled, a small upward twitch she felt more than showed. Then she wrote in her pocket slate, map updates nightly. Need to verify shift. We test route at dusk. Pack light. Emilio nodded, signing back with deliberate calm. Leaving means abandoning survivors who trust your charts. Her answer came like fluid between stones. Tide will drown them anyway. Best gift is path out. I will copy tonight's map for all. He stared at her for a long moment, then accepted. They parted to prepare heat to secure wind gauges and waterproof batteries. She to draft 3 smaller replicas of the living map's current form. Ink on plastic film, color-coded for those who could still see hues washed out by salt glaring. She tacked the copies on the tower's stairwell, where scavengers and stragglers would find them. Below each, she wrote in block letters, Tide claims all ground by dawn. Follow green path west for Higgerfuthels. Safe until next spring. She believed the message, but she would not be with them to know whether they survived. At sunset, the city was a bonfire of reflections. Orange skies mirrored in black floodwater. Cormorants cutting sharp silhouettes across pallid clouds. Serafina and Emilio stood on an inclined roof at the northern edge of Cannaregio, precisely where the living map showed them to begin. She carried the ember-bright page rolled in a glass tube. He carried a coil of carbon fiber line, micro-grapples, and a collapsible pole. They moved at speed, leaping broken gaps between upper floors, wading thigh-deep where water carved new canals through brick. Serafina navigated by memory, supplemented by glances at the glowing map. Each time she unrolled it, she felt the fibers swirl beneath its surface, rearranging. The path stayed true green line, blinking softly, always drifting east of the highest currents. Twice they saw others. First, a pair of women tugging a raft of sealed barrels. Second, a child alone on a rooftop, waving frantically. Emilio slowed, heart in his face, but Serafina touched his arm, pointed to the copies she had posted. The child had likely seen them. Even if not, every minute mattered. The tide, pacified briefly by twilight, would surge again after the moon cleared the ruins. They could not spare the time. Guilt was a taste, bitter as the salt chafing her lips. She swallowed it with water from her canteen and pressed on. An hour after full dark, they reached the warehouses. 4 hulks rising from silt, leaning like drunken giants. One had collapsed inward, burying a freight tram in twisted steel. Another still bore a neon logo, Flavia Sich, flickering pale violet. The map glowed bright now, its veins pulsing faster as though urging them to hurry. Emilio unhooked a pry bar from his belt and jammed it into a rusted side door. Serafina watched the water line creep up the warehouse walls, centimeters in minutes. They would have maybe 45 minutes before the courtyard they stood on submerged. Inside, the air smelled of stale hydrogen and algae. An overhead gantry still hummed faintly, drawing residual power from some forgotten cell. Serafina swung her lamp in a slow, methodical pattern. Shapes emerged. Crates, cables, tangled netting, and at the far end a shaft of bright white radiance descending from a square opening in the ceiling. Emilio exhaled soundlessly beside her. He pointed upward. The living map's path ended precisely at their feet. Serafina craned to see. The opening extended further than a simple hole, into a corridor lined with steel ribs that vanished into darkness. Small pinpoints of moving light tracked along the ribs, ascending, descending, like beads drawn by hidden threads. "Elevator," she signed, the word trembling. But where was the access carriage? She shone her lamp along the floor and saw embedded rails, flush with concrete, running to the base of the shaft. No cabin waited there. A control pedestal sat nearby, dented but intact, its interface blank. Emilio knelt and pried the panel off, revealing corroded circuits. He connected a portable cell. LEDs winked alive. He gestured to Serafina. "Try the main." She pressed the highest physical button, the one marked with a soaring arrow. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, vibration spread through the floor plates. Dust trickled from overhead joints. She felt, rather than heard, the low thunder of massive machinery awakening. Some ancient motor, likely buried deep below, turned over like a leviathan rolling in sleep. But something else awoke as well. From the shadows above, cables shivered and a shape the size of a small tram detached. It descended yards, halted. Floodlights flickered on its belly, bathing the warehouse in icy brilliance. The carriage had no doors. Instead, its floor opened like petals, revealing a mesh platform and 4 pop-out harness rings. Words in 5 languages scrolled across a holographic banner. "Payload mode detected. Please secure cargo. Ascent concentrine in 10 minutes 600 seconds." Serafina looked at Emilio. "Cargo," she signed, "not passengers." He scanned the banner's subsequent lines. Weight limit per harness 120 kg. Life support minimal. Journey duration 17 minutes. So it was never meant for comfortable travel, just for moving goods to the stratospheric spool, where other lifts caught them. He grinned nonetheless. 17 minutes beats drowning. She allowed herself the same wild grin. But another thought intruded. Living map draws safe path each night. It brought them here. Now. If they ascended, the map's purpose changed. Would it adjust again tomorrow for those following? No way to know. The city would be underwater by dawn. and whatever drew the algorithmic algae or ghost network of satellites or some deeper magic had chosen them tonight. She unrolled the sheet one final time. The image was reconfiguring already, edges liquefying, ink veins retracting like roots from dry soil. In less than a minute, the sheet lay blank except for one sentence burning across its center. Nothing left to chart here. She traced the words with a fingertip, fighting sudden tears. Then she carefully rolled the sheet back, slipped it into its tube, and placed it on a crate where any who arrived after might find it. It would be useless to them, yet she still felt wrong taking it into air it had never known. Biliu checked the countdown to 3 minutes. They clipped themselves to opposite corners of the mesh, balancing mass. The harness rings tightened automatically, scans verifying vital signs through their suits. A siren began to pulse, low red strobes warning of imminent movement. She felt the vibrations escalate. Water sloshed against the warehouse threshold now. Fish darted in like scouts. Serafina watched their silver bodies weave under the lights, indifferent witnesses to everything humankind tried to salvage. 90 seconds. She lifted her eyes to Emilio's. He touched the side of his throat, more comfort than speech, then signed. "Up we go, Fina." She nodded. The mechanical voice, unheard by her, echoed through the structure, but she read it scrawling beside her harness. Clamp releasing, shave lock disengaged, and the world dropped away. The carriage accelerated with gut-tugging speed, 8, maybe 10 meters per second. Wind clawed at the mesh floor, whipping ash and dust into thin ribbons that spiraled downward. Within moments, warehouse rooflines flattened below. Then the sea itself unrolled a massive wrinkled cloth, black and seemingly motionless despite its hunger. Serafina's breath hitched. Her stars overhead sharpened, freed from lower humidity. The platform swayed gently on the long cable, but stabilizers dampened most of it. She forced her lungs into steady rhythm. A warning flashed, temperature falling, microfrost protection required. She zipped her hood, pulled goggles across her eyes. Emilio mimicked. Minutes passed, measured by altitude readout. 1,500 meters? 3,000? 5,000? Cloud layers glimmered, backlit by moonlight. They pierced one gauzy veil, emerged into clear air so crisp it felt like new existence. She tasted dryness, smelled ozone. Gravity's pull eased as ascent decelerated. Ahead, a disk of light gathered. A station? No, a transfer ring spinning slowly, tethered to the cable like a bead on a thread. Panels opened as they neared, revealing docking claws. The banner updated. Manual dock required, no automation. The stern revealed, "Make." Amelia's eyebrows spoke volumes. Serafina shrugged out of her harness, crawled along the mesh to the control yoke. The ring loomed, rotation slight but relentless. If they misjudged, the carriage would slam and shear away, dropping them into darkness. She breathed, counted rotations, imagined musical tempo she could no longer hear but once knew Largo. Adagio, andante. On the silent beat 3, she nudged the yoke. Thruster spat cold gas. The carriage drifted sideways, matching spin. Claws engaged with metallic certainty she felt through her bones. A final lurch and they were part of the orb, still swinging but secure. Inside the ring, emergency lamps glowed. Atmosphere here was thin but respirable. Fans hummed. Canted windows offered panoramic views. South, across glimmering water. North toward the mainland, its sparse lights flickering like insects along the horizon. A glow far inland marked the refugee shanties on the old autostrada. Serafina's eyes devoured the scene. She had spent a lifetime charting ground that vanished every year. Here, above, nothing dissolved except clouds. Land remained land, sea remained sea, boundaries crisp. For a cartographer, it was a miracle. She noticed a console blinking amber. Approach vector. Another lift perhaps online? She keyed the plaintext feed. Data scrolled, a system still alive enough to gather telemetry. She cross-referenced. Multiple freight cradles offline, but one passenger capsule showed inbound from Dolomites via Anchor Line 8, ETA 2 hours. The Sky Elevator network, half dead but not fully, islands of function in an ocean of failure. Emilio stood transfixed by the view. She tapped his shoulder, gestured. "Worth saving?" He nodded furiously. Maintenance manuals filled cabinets on the wall. She pulled one, scanned diagrams. Cables stressed, power low, but with hydrogen reserves in the warehouse below, they could recharge capacitors. Tools were stored 2 modules over. The elevator could be restored to safe operation for at least a few more cycles, enough to spirit away refugees who reached the floodlines in time. She turned to Emilio, eyes shining. "Our map lives again," she signed. He frowned. "Map blank." She lifted her slate. "We become the map." Understanding dawned. He straightened, rolled his shoulders. "We broadcast coordinates nightly, laser beacons, flares, radio where possible. Chart tides from above, guide them here." Yes, a distant rumble shivered the hull. Seismic tremor from the city below. Through the window she saw a plume of fire where gas lines ruptured under water pressure. Cannaregio, the tower where she had worked so long, toppled in slow, stately agony, vanishing into surf. She felt grief like a wave. But above it rose conviction. She and Emilio stood at a fulcrum between drowning past and uncertain future, and they would chart that future, or die trying. She pulled a cable spool from the tool rack, set a beacon transistor on the bench, began soldering contacts. Emilio fetched oxygen canisters, refilled station reserves. They moved with the surety of those who had no other choice. Hours later, dawn smeared pink across the edge of the world. From their vantage, they saw New Venice resplendent, half submerged, half ablaze, her marble bones dissolving into the Adriatic. But farther north, tiny shapes, boats, rafts, improvised sailboards already followed the routes she had plotted. Some would fail. Many perhaps would reach the warehouse, find the rising capsule, and ascend. Serafina pressed her fingertips to the viewport. She thought of the living map behind on the crate, blank and still. It had carried them as far as it could. Now its patterns lived inside her memory, inside the station's transmitters, inside every coordinate she would collect from this new perch among the clouds. "No more ashes," she told the city silently. "No more drowned." Behind her, Emilio adjusted the antenna, and the first beacon sparked to life, its pulse flickering across the dawn. A green line in the sky, pointing the way to anyone who dared follow before the tides reclaimed all land.